about in many ways. And I've been absolutely obsessed with this story since I was a graduate student at Davis, when the community in Sacramento was just taking shape. And to think that I then was hired at the University of Oregon 15 years ago, and I came up here swearing never to study this community because I was just obsessed. My love life had fallen apart, my kids were sick of it, it was a mess. Anyway, when I got here, the first day I was in Eugene, there was an article in the Oregonian about IRCO, the Immigrant Community and Refugee Organization, which I'll be talking about. And I immediately reported for duty, and I've been working with them ever since here in Portland. But one important thing about this, speaking about sort of location patterns, it's important for me to remember to say the Portland metro area, because this story is very suburban, and that's really different for immigrant groups. Most immigrants in the old days, like Chicago, came to the downtowns of cities, worked in low-income employment, worked their way up and out to the suburbs. Nowadays, that's exactly the opposite. And this group, because they're white and Protestant and they blend in right away, as we already talked about a little bit earlier, are very suburban. So they extend really from Aloha and Beaverton all the way to Gresham in terms of east-west to the suburbs, mostly not downtown, and then from Wilsonville north to Vancouver, Washington. So that's why I wanted to put that map up just to start so I wouldn't forget to say that. What I'm going to do today then are three things, I hope, because I'm so hyper. We don't have much time, and I'm going to try to stick to this. I'm going to try to talk quickly about why there are so many people here. We're talking between 60 and 80,000 post-Soviet arrivals of these evangelicals. This is about 98% of the larger community of Russian-speaking people here. This is a huge community. You'll see them coming into Portland Airport, if you haven't already seen that, getting off the planes even now. And the first question then is, what's going on? Why are they here? What are they drawn to, and how did they figure out how to come here in such large number? The second question is, where do they live in Portland? Okay, that's the part I probably won't dwell on too much. I've already mentioned it twice. And then, what do you see on the landscape so that you know that they're here? What kinds of evidences are there out there that they're here? That's what geographers look at. What's on the landscape? You know, how does Lewis and Clark College look compared to the U of O? Let's not go there. This is the most beautiful campus I've ever seen. So, anyway, who are these Russian-speaking evangelicals? They're fundamentalist evangelicals. And there's at least one in the room right now who would want me to remind everybody, past, falling away. Anyway, from the San Francisco story, it started in the 1950s, so in Oregon it's just a later story. But our story here started in earnest in the 90s, but in the late 80s really began in Woodburn, interestingly enough. So who are they? Why do so many people live in the Portland area, not just Portland? And what's going on here? So the first thing is, most of the people I'm talking about are Baptist and Pentecostal, but a number of them are Seventh-day Adventist. They're very conservative, they're very fundamentalist in their beliefs, and most of the information, this is for the students who are so wonderful to still be here, the last speaker, most of the information I report to you on I got from going to church over and over and over. So to make interviews with pastors and then meet with them afterwards and meet all the people, that's the ticket. I can sing every single Jesus Loves Me song right now. So that's the connection. That's super important to remember. There's no exam on this, of course, today. But the key thing is that they have religious networks that really brought them here. The second key thing is these are refugees. They're not immigrants. So they had, not now, they're not refugees now. But up until 2005, early 2006, they were classified by our government as refugees. They got support for their plane fare. They got 8 months support here if they went to their English language and work skills classes at IRCO. They get 10 months of support in Vancouver because Washington State has a more supportive system than we do. That's one of the reasons they're moving to the other side of the bridge, by the way, but that's another story. So the refugee status was a big part of this. And it was all about Reagan and Gorbachev. It was all about that. And it was all about them being Protestant. And about the whole thing of opening the doors. It wasn't about the group that Paulina talked about that had been trying for decades to break down those doors. It was about the group that looks like the rest of Oregon. Oregon's about still 98.6% in the 2010 census Protestant and white. I know we don't have a religious census, but I have another data source for that I can talk about later if we have time. And then why are they here? Why not? Why now? What's going on? And as I mentioned there, what I'm going to talk about now is a long list of push-pull factors. Why did they leave? Why did they come? What were the bigger stories? It's not just because they're refugees. It's not just because they're Pentecostals and Baptists. That's part of it, but there's a lot of other things about Portland. Portland is visionary in environmental planning, in transportation design. It's also visionary in its refugee resettlement programs. All of that plays a part in this. So I'm going to call these transnational. I'm going to go out on a limb. You talked about diaspora, so I'm glad I got to throw a theoretical term in here. I'm going to talk about transnational Slavic, I know I shouldn't use that word, Russian-speaking fundamentalist networks. Before migration, the list goes on, but these church sponsors that came from congregations from Woodburn and Salem and Gresham and all the, Happy Valley and Beaverton, those church congregations of Pentecostals and Baptists are sponsoring these groups. And so that's the first bullet. Second bullet is, starting in Sacramento in my grad student days, they were beaming messages into the Siberian communities, which I visited and met people that listened to these messages, Christian messages. And they said, come to the Pacific Northwest, come to Sacramento, it's the promised land. There were shortwave radio broadcasts going in the 1970s. It was called Word to Russia. That's another big piece. And then now there's all this Skyping, emailing, all this stuff that we talk about chain migration that really is sort of new to someone my age, that's going on in terms of the increasing numbers of people and what happens when they are still in Russia, Ukraine, and so forth, and in the early days, former whole Soviet Union. And then when they get here, when they get to Portland, our government has a family reunification policy. You probably know this. This is the top thing on the list. And so if you have a family member here, you can get in more easily. Mm-hmm. It's still difficult. It takes a long time in most cases, but that's another reason chain migration is happening. It's family-based, it's religion-based. On that same list, it's lots of support here for jobs, for housing out in the Gateway District initially, and then across the Portland urban area. And the final bullet on the list, I have to say again, the ease of integration is both good and bad, both easy for them and hard for them. To keep their identity, just only having a linguistic identity, but yet to blend in and be invisible, means in some cases they don't get the support that I personally think they really need in many cases. So a few pictures just to show you this. This is a Pentecostal service. As a former Pentecostal, I shouldn't show you this. This is me with it's true, with my digital tape recorder in my bag, recording them speaking in tongues, which is just it's inexcusable, but it was amazing. I'd love to play it, I won't play it though. And so this is actually a church out in Rockwood, is that right? Yep, big Russian community there. So again, the question, why are those people out there? Why are they doing that? What's happening? And so a couple other big points, big meaning overarching, not big that they're overly important, I guess. But the first one, or the 10th one, I guess I'm about up to the list of 10 at this point, is that now immigrants and refugees across the board in the U.S., not in Canada, are going to new non-traditional gateway cities. They're not going to the old immigrant neighborhoods in Philadelphia where I grew up, or in New York, or anything. They're going to new places. And my students are doing dissertations for their PhD on some of those places that are in Idaho and so forth. They're in Omaha. They're in places you would never suspect.